Welcome back
to Islamic preacher and apologist. A very big hello and assalamu alaikum to you all. Now let's get to the video. Today's video is called Why Do People Obtain Knowledge from Worthless Scholars? And I'll be responding to this particular video. First, I will put all the facts and figures on the table of where Islam stands today. Then slowly and gradually I will respond to Farid response concerns. A majority of Muslim representatives, let's say those that represent Islam, come from non-Arab regions, when in fact the Quran is written in Arabic, and Islam itself took off from the Middle Eastern world. If there were no partition between India and Pakistan, then we'd realize that the vast majority of Muslim population resides in the Asian subcontinent. This means that, however and in whichever way the non-Arab Muslims behave, they'd affect the religion as a whole. Islam is a victim of two major things. One is misinterpretation, and the other is misrepresentation. David Wood wrongly puts it as miracle of reinterpretation.
Oh, you know, we have to interpret these things. Miracle of reinterpretation.
And why did he do such a thing that if or when Muslims create refutation videos or response videos, he can prepare his audience in advance just in case a Muslim did give a reply? The same goes with his taqiyya claim. He does it once and he does it twice and many times. Taqiyya is only a practice when you fear persecution, not like that. He has practiced his audience into believing that Muslims are some sort of artists who can present their scriptures in sugar-coated words, just so that their mind gets programmed to not believe in their refutation videos. You see, there are three categories. One, representatives of Islam. These are Muslims, which are mostly non-Arabs. These are actually victims of misinterpretation. Two comes Islamic critics that make a career out of misinterpretation, which has led to misrepresentation. Three, Islamophobes, those that listen to these Islamic critics. Every Muslim scholar or student of Islam presents Islam in accordance to which region they grew up in. Differences between scholars is nothing new, and watch this.
Years ago, before I had read a single word of an Islamic source, I watched several debates between Christians and Muslims. The Muslim apologists differed on some very important points.
You know, when Muslim scholars obtain information in the first place, see, obtaining information is one thing, absorbing information is another thing. So when we absorb information, it's highly dependent on our previous experiences, our previous life experiences, what works and what doesn't work anymore. You know, when I was a child, I read a fairy tale called Cinderella. And there was this part where, chapter where, the prince says that whoever fits into these shoes is my princess, Cinderella. So what happens in the storyline is that every woman of the town tries to fit in to those shoes, the shoes of Cinderella. But do you know what these shoes stand for? What these shoes were a parable of? These shoes were a parable of criteria. In the Holy Quran, there is a chapter called Surah Furqan, the criterion. So why do people listen to Mufti Abu Layth? And these are mostly Westerners. You know, when you own beautiful shoes and suddenly your feet suddenly have grown, you've got two options. You would find a way in which you can fit into those shoes again, or you would have to do something about the shoe so that you can modify the shoe in a way that it fits into your feet. So how do I explain this Islamically? It's either that we fit into Islam or Islam fits into us. Here Mufti Abu Layth steps in and says you do not need to do any work whatsoever, it's all permissible. And they feel that Mufti Abu Layth understands their situation much better. And that's for the Western scholar, but Eastern scholars are doing another thing. Eastern scholars or scholars in Pakistan are endorsing that it's generally okay to beat your wife. And watch this.
These recommendations are according to Quran and Sunnah, the Prophet's teachings. No one can dispute that.
Say that this allows men to abuse women, that this allows for the humiliation of women in a marriage.
If a woman does not fulfill her responsibilities in marriage, first you advise her. If that doesn't work, then you consult her relatives. If that doesn't work, then you desert her in bed. If all of this doesn't work, then light beating is allowed.
Some men will take what you said as an excuse to abuse their wives. They're going to say, well, my wife hasn't fulfilled her responsibility and so
beat her. But the thing is that Middle Eastern scholars are a much better option than those that live in the Asian subcontinent. We all know that these two scholars have something highly against one another. One calls the other a Tekken character, the other calls the other Ganguly Dilli. Ganguly Dilli is a famous name given to someone who comes from a village in India. Those that seriously do deserve being considered as somebody who belongs to the village or a remote place are those that actually endorse wife beating. However, the issue is that name calling does affect someone's reputation and other people's opinion in regards to you, which is why people have resorted to people like Mufti Abu Layth, thinking this person would understand us better. See, the thing is that Middle East is somewhere in between Asia, and the West. If these Middle Eastern scholars, if these could update themselves a little bit further, then people like Mufti Abu Layth would not be needed. People listen to Abu Layth because they believe that he's going to help them fit in. I have a question for everyone who's watching, that if scholars are not in agreement with one another, hadiths are contradicting one another, what is going to be the reaction, the response of those that are watching? It's not like people just don't care. The fact is, every single conflict between Muslims, every single contradiction in sources gets taken into consideration. But the media has done its own job. Let me read the heading. Pakistan ranks as the 6th most dangerous country in the world for women, with cases of sexual crimes and domestic violence recording a rapid rise. Activists blame society's patriarchal attitudes for the problem. David Wood, in his beginning of his career, if you see the first or the earliest videos of his, you notice that he used to use newspaper reports to taboo Islam. Such newspaper reports helped David Wood's career to take off. But what would you say about the following report of The Guardian? Poll ranks India the world's most dangerous country for women. In another report I read that India is the worst place to be born a woman. And let's read on. A survey of global experts puts Afghanistan and Syria in 2nd and 3rd place, with the US the only Western nation in the top 10. However, my concern is that wife beating is not the only issue in which Muslim scholars actually differ in. Muslim scholars in countries like Pakistan are also endorsing things like halal marriage, child marriage, marital rape, and many other things. Now, since I consider myself to be a student of knowledge, I actually refute these claims. I understand that there is a large issue regards to misinterpretation. Modern or Western scholars, which I label myself as one, are those that are actually refuting these claims based on wife beating or halal marriage, etc. And take, for example, this particular YouTube video and see the date on this, 22nd January 2020. In this video, I refuted the wife beating verse. Now, if there's anyone who has done this before me, before that said date, who uploaded a video, I'd like to know about him or her. Only Western scholars / modern scholars, modern-minded scholars, are actually finding a solution for these problems. Sheikh Yasir Khadi has cracked another joke on YouTube. Even I, as an ant-sized YouTuber, had found a better answer than him. First, I will show you what he had to say, and then I will tell you what I had to say.
Islam is for everyone. But Sheikh Yasir Khadi recently expressed, actually, certain verses in the Quran is not for those people who live in western part of the world. He put a fatwa against the word of Allah and then told Muslims to skip the third part of this verse. Of course, let's get to hear from him.
And the Quran does give 3 steps, which is the famous verse of Surah An-Nisa, which number 1, Allah says, advise her, فَعِضُوهُنَّ, right? Tell her that marriage is not going to flourish this way. I mean, it's not fair. What do you expect me to do? Marriage has to be based on love. فَعِضُوهُنَّ, ask her of her rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, leave her in her bed. So abandon her. You go to the bedroom, to the living room, and you leave her in the bedroom. You make her understand that things are getting serious. The third thing that is mentioned in the Quran, my philosophy or my fatwa is that in the cultures that we live in, this is an option, A, B, or C. It's not wajib. If you have to get to C, my advice is jump over C and move to divorce. Then if it's really not working and you're not able to get to the marital happiness, فَعِضُوهُنَّ وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ, and then in the society and the times and the cultures that we live in, resorting to option C is going to break the marriage. There is the point of option C when it was done in other societies and times, it might have saved the marriage. In some cultures, option C might have saved the marriage, but in the cultures...
However, when I did an in-depth analysis, I came up with the following research. And that the word daraba has many different meanings: to travel, to get out, to strike, to beat, to set up, to give examples, to take away, to ignore, to condemn, to seal, to draw over, to cover, used to tell women to cover their chest, cleavage, not their heads, to explain. And these are those other meanings that it could possibly mean. Now, in my opinion, this sounds better than to skip or to jump or to ignore. But I can appreciate the effort of Western scholars of trying to solve the problem, whereas the scholars in the eastern part of the world, Asian subcontinent, are just trying to ruin Islam. And I'll give 2 more examples. One is false. And I would rather that male Muslim scholars look into those hadiths. They do it. I would rather that these people did it